Good morning, everyone. It is a great pleasure for me, on behalf of the Norwegian School of Sports Sciences, to welcome you all to this trial lecture in Department Fulfillment of the Requirements for the Award of Doctor of Philosophy in Sports Science. My name is Tomo Nilsen, and I am the acting head of department at the Department of Physical Performance. And in Rector's absence, it is my pleasure to chair these two sessions here today. I would like to welcome the members of the examination committee, Professor Lene Anette Hogstad, Norwegian School of Sports Sciences, chairperson, Professor Heikki Kyräläinen, Faculty of Sports and Health Sciences, University of Jyväskylä, first opponent, Professor Ferdinand von Walden, Department of Women and Children's Health, Karolinska Institutet, Stockholm, second opponent. Furthermore, I would like to welcome the candidate, Sjur Øfsteng, who will give the following lecture. What are the short and long-term benefits of maintaining physical fitness for military personnel during prolonged operations, and what are the most effective? Indeed, over to you, Sjur.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for the introduction, Tormod. So I got this assignment for my trial lecture, and I need to start with an outline of this talk. To get a better understanding of this assignment and why the physical fitness is of importance for the soldier, we need to start with what is characterizing a military operation. And then we will look into the demand of the modern soldier before I talk about determinants of military readiness. Before I talk about the benefit of maintaining physical fitness during deployment, before I talk about strategies to maintain physical fitness during prolonged operations, before ending up with a practical application. To narrowing the scope a little bit, physiological fitness is defined as strength and endurance-related variables, and military personnel are not being categorized into their military occupational specialties. And I will not delve too much into biological mechanisms occurring during operations. So, what is a military operation? So, a military operation is not a fixed situation. It continuously varies in degrees of intensity and complexity on a day or weekly basis. On the one side, we have stable peace with low intensity and complexity. Moving along this line to the right, the degrees of intensity and complexity increases towards wartime, which is wartime. Along this continuum, we have different levels of operations. In the first level, the military is engaged to control tension between groups, predominantly without force and often involve being deployed in a foreign country. The day-to-day conflict tension is low. Moving along to the right, the conflict level increases and the soldier's readiness level is elevated. It typically involves small-scale operations of limited duration, such as non-combat evacuations. To the far right, there is sustained operations in conflict with other nations or groups. It is often a series of operations aimed to restore security and strategic positioning within a given time. This is often associated with full wartime. Along with the increasing tension in a conflict, the soldier must constantly cope with an increased degree of intensity and complexity of this operation, meaning the soldier needs to be ready for the demands of the operation both physically and mentally. And this defines the soldier's military readiness, which must be sustained irrespective of where they are in this conflict continuum. And to sustain this military readiness over time, it demands that the soldier's physical fitness level is maintained as high as possible, independent of being in this stable peace area or moving up to this wartime conflict. So this demand line of fitness needs to be high to ensure soldiers' military readiness. So as the conflict may move from left to the right on a day-to-day basis, very fast. So the demand of having a high physical fitness is closely connected with soldiers' military readiness. And now let us look into how the demand of the soldiers' physical fitness has evolved on the modern battlefield. From the World War I until freedom operation in Iraq and Afghanistan, there has been a linear increase in load carrying on soldiers' body. This is mainly due to the development of advanced protective armor and weapon systems, which has led to load carrying on body has increased from around 5 kilo up to over 30 kilo over these years, 100 years. As a matter of fact, there is reported that soldiers during 1 year deployment are in average carrying daily around 22 kilo extra load on body compared to garrison duty. So consequently, the extra load carried is putting daily and extra physiological stress on the soldier, thus maintaining the demand for high physiological fitness. Furthermore, as the real-world mission requirements and new technology and equipment emphasize a higher need for anaerobic capacity, especially in the special forces. Instead of walking long distances to the enemy objectives, soldiers are now transported close to the target, wherein the soldier with combat gear are moving fast up down buildings or terrain in offensive and defensive maneuvers. Consequently, the anaerobic requirement is elevated and adding another demand on the soldier's physical fitness capacity. Additionally, increases the demand of performing heavy tasks during deployment. There is reported 22% increases in physical demanding tasks during deployment compared to garrison duties, hence adding an extra physiological stress on the soldier. All these demands, which has increased gradually with the modern battlefield, thus highlight the need for high physical fitness during deployment, and will thus also affect soldiers' military readiness. So now we need further define the determinants for military readiness. As we see, the military readiness is dependent on a high physical fitness, irrespective of the degree of the conflict. And this fitness status is built on the soldier's strength and endurance capacities. This is because soldier strength and endurance capacity are found to be associated with several occupational and combat-like tasks. To highlight that, I plotted data from several studies looking into this relationship. And we see that the maximal strength has found to have a moderate to strong correlation with many combat-like tasks. For example, repeated lift, crawling, dig, causality drag, and jump skills. Meaning, are you stronger, you would also likely perform better in these military performance outcomes. A strong argument for sustaining strength capacity during deployment and ensure military readiness. Likewise, the same is seen between endurance capacity and these military tasks, as we can see with the run, load carry, and crawl and dig. Interestingly, we see that several of these relationships overlaps between strength and endurance. For example, move fast, dig and crawl, repeat the lift, and load and carry. Meaning the soldier is dependent on both physical capacities, as they need to train both capacities to optimize military readiness. However, there is more determinant factors that will affect soldiers' military readiness and also challenge the maintenance of high physical capacity. With the increased intensity and complexity in the conflict area, moving towards the right side, additional factors will simultaneously increase and challenge soldiers' military readiness. These factors increases concurrently with the intensity of the conflicts, such as increases in sleep deprivation, there are increases in energy deficit, there's increase in recovery deficit, and the duration of the operation, and also increases in the physical strenuous activities. These factors alone or in combination will induce a physiological stress on the soldier, which in the end will affect soldier's military readiness. Additional to these multi-stress factors, we have the impact of the environment the soldier operates in, where in cold climate can, for example, compromise soldiers' fine motor skill, resulting in reduced capability of shooting, hence reducing soldiers' military readiness. Consequently, of being in this right side of the conflict continuum for extended times would be detrimental for the soldier, as the physical fitness level may decline due to the impact of the stress factor, and thus will also affect soldiers' readiness. To get an idea how the multi-stress factors affect the soldier's physical fitness level and readiness, we have in several years performed field exercise studies. Field exercise studies is meant to train and prepare the soldier for the real-world battlefield operations, and thus the soldier is exposed for several of these stressors experienced during high-intensity conflict simultaneously. From these studies, we see that the soldier's body homeostasis is changing towards being in a more catabolic state, wherein the body will maintain its metabolism for vital processes at the expense of regeneration of functional body structures. Consequently, this may reduce physical and military performance due to loss of skeletal muscle, loss of body mass, loss of muscle function. It also increases risk of injury and also reduce the cognitive function. And it can even jeopardize missions and lives. So, being able to maintain its physical fitness levels is of importance, as these stress factors will induce negative physiological changes in periods during deployment, especially towards this right side of the continuum, and thus compromise soldiers' physical performance and readiness. But let us look into the short and long-term benefits of maintaining physical fitness during prolonged operations. The short and long-term benefit of maintained physical fitness need to be seen in conjunction with each other, as the long-term benefit will depend on how the short-term benefits are achieved and sustained. This is because the short-term benefit will rely on how the deployment period evolves in terms of frequency of operations where the soldiers experience being in this multi-stressor environment. So I call this model a benefit continuum, as short and long-term benefits are interconnected. So let's look at factors associated with maintained physical fitness during deployment. A main category which is enhanced with physical fitness is the improved physical and mental resilience, which is the soldier's ability to meet and cope with physical and mental demands of any combat or duty position. This can eventually lead to better physical readiness through maintained strength, power, and endurance capacities. With maintained fitness, the soldier will better cope with heavy task duties during deployment period. Furthermore, physical fitness may enhance stress resilience. It will also maintain cognitive function and memory. It also reduces risk of musculoskeletal injuries. Soldiers may also recover faster from operational stress. And the soldier will also be more resilient towards rapid changes in the environment they are operating in. So maintaining these fitness-related attributes in relation to the short, acute benefits, the soldier may also in the long run tackle long periods experience physical and mental stress, and better preserve perceived well-being and long-term health, with reduced risk of developing diseases and infection. And being better fit during deployment periods has also been associated with low risk of developing post-traumatic stress when they are coming home. So to be able to maintain physical fitness and achieve these benefits and hence sustain military readiness, we can use different training strategies, which is implemented under these circumstances, both at the low end and also during these high conflict end areas. So let us look into possible training strategies and what have been done before in some deployment studies. Okay, these training strategies revolve around three main principles designed to give your body the right kind of stimuli to trigger changes in your neuromuscular and cardiorespiratory system, and will thus have an effect on maintaining this physical fitness demand line in the continuum. For example, we can induce a stimuli to these body systems by including repeated bouts with progressive overload that subsequently will enhance structural adaptations over time. We can also use the principle of specificity of training, where we replicate the movement pattern of a specific task, which progressively increase in intensity. Over time, this would stimulate the neuromuscular system to adapt and enhance performance in that specific task. And to reduce training monotony and stagnation in adaptation, the periodization strategy is often applied in training plans, wherein the purpose is to systematically vary in our training modalities, intensity and volume, and exercises to ensure variation in training stimuli and thus enhance development of adaptations over time. This may reduce the potential for overtraining. In particular, have the periodization model, block periodization, been recommended for soldiers to use both before and during deployment periods. With block periodization, the soldier can in different periods work with different focus, with the aim to maximize a physiological capacity while maintaining other capacities simultaneously. This has frequently been shown to be effective in athletes and has shown to improve both strength and endurance capacities simultaneously, which is of importance since soldiers need to maintain both capacity to ensure military readiness. But we know that the soldiers is in a challenging position, as the degree of conflict continuum will vary in the presence of single or multiple stress factors that consequently would put the soldier in a more maladaptive state. But what happens to physical fitness level and body composition during prolonged operations where soldier is deployed? To get an idea of this, let us look at some of these deployment studies. These prolonged operations are described with a range from 3 to 15 months of duration, where they are deployed in Afghanistan, Chad, Lebanon, Iraq, or Kosovo. These deployment studies have predominantly been operated in this middle or end of this conflict continuum. So let's first look at changes in physical performance parameters following deployment periods. So I plotted data from different deployment studies. See on the y-axis, and we have % change from before to after deployment on the x-axis. The overall impression is that strength and power are not that negatively affected of the deployment period, seen as a greater than 7% increase in strength in general, indicated by this shaded area, along with less pronounced changes in the power parameters. While aerobic performance seems to decline more during deployment, as indicated on the left side of this shaded area. However, there is variation between studies seen in these outcomes. For the body composition, in general, there was less than 4% change in body mass and muscle mass over these prolonged periods. Most values were within this shaded area, indicating now the 4% margin. The changes are going on both directions of the dashed line, as you can see, and the larger variation was seen in fat mass between these studies. This variation in outcomes could be related to different durations in the deployment periods. ranging from 3 months up to 15 months of duration. There is also larger variation between studies when the post-deployment measure was performed, ranging from 0 to 60 days in general, and even larger in SHARP, which tested over 209 days after they had come home. But why this dropping aerobic capacity? We see that some early studies around 2010, soldiers report to train less aerobic during deployment compared to garrison duties. 88% of the soldiers trained under garrison as a pre-deployment, while 29% of the soldiers performed endurance training during deployed. Hence, the training volume drops. Whereas for strength, there is a lower or no drop between pre and deployment. So why is it so? One reason could be that the low air quality in these countries and the soldiers were actually obligated not to perform aerobic exercise due to respiratory health concerns. Another reason, which is talked about and speculated about, could be related that the better fit soldiers entering the deployment period does not have sufficient training scheduling during the deployment period to maintain their capacity. While the more sustained or improved strength outcomes could in this regard be related to lower fit soldiers entering the deployment period and achieve adaptation by repeated overload stimulus by doing more heavy task assignments during the deployment period. So, summary of these deployment studies, body compositions is not that affected over these prolonged deployment periods. Aerobic capacity seems to decline more than strength capacity during deployment. There are large heterogeneity between deployment studies in duration and measurement time points. This makes it challenging to draw valid conclusions. So, but independent of when or how the soldiers were measured in these outcomes parameters after the deployment period, there seems to be some variation whether a soldier maintain or lose physical fitness during deployment periods. So to be able to maintain physical fitness, where in this conflict continuum is more optimal to train systematic over time. And it is most likely in the left end of the conflict continuum towards the stable peace conditions, wherein the impact of each of these stress factors are at the lowest intensity. For when the conflict level is low for longer periods and the intensity of stress factors is minimal, the soldier is more likely in a more homeostatic balance over time. Hence, this is probably the closest they can come to an anabolic window over time, where the body can adapt to training stimuli more optimal. So let us look into a couple of studies which have been reported to have performed systematic training during a deployment period. These studies were interpreted as being in the low conflict area of the continuum, with presumably few external stress factors being present in combination during this deployment period. Warren and colleagues included 88 soldiers in this study. They did not report where these soldiers were deployed or for how long. The measurements were reported 10 days after homecoming from this period. And the purpose of the study was to measure training frequency and changes in performance and perceived health following the deployment period. Following that period, 57% of the soldiers reported to have trained equal to or greater than 3 times per week in aerobic training. And 67% of the soldiers reported they have trained equal to or greater than 3 times per week in strength training. And those with greater training frequency also had a greater aerobic capacity at homecoming, they saw. The same was seen for strength. And the soldiers reduced fat mass and increased muscle mass during the period, while this also occurred independent of training frequency during the deployment. For the health factor, Close to 3 times as many soldiers reported better health status post-deployment when having over 3 sessions per week in endurance training. So this study shows the importance of having regular training during deployment, showing that it is possible to maintain physical performance and health status, and importantly, probably can sustain prolonged military readiness under deployment periods. In another study, P-Line and colleagues investigated a periodization model during deployment for 6 months. Wherein they wanted to explore the effect of combining strength and endurance training on body composition and physical performance with systematic training over time. This study was also performed in the low area of the conflict, interpreted as minimal combination of stress factors. Due to the authors describes the period consisted predominantly of low-intensity activities, with activities such as patrolling, observation outside the military base, and duties inside the base. But the soldiers were obligated to maintain operative readiness, so some psychological stress of the soldier could be present. P-Line included 78 soldiers performed block periodization training, and they were split into 3 experimental groups. A traditional group which performed 2 strength and 2 endurance sessions, and the strength focus group which performed 3 strength and 1 endurance session, while the endurance group performed 3 endurance and 1 strength session. And they also included a control group reporting their training time. And these 4 sessions were individually chosen when to perform over 2 weeks periods throughout the deployment period. In average, the soldiers performed 3.2 training sessions per week during the period, and the overall training groups improved muscle mass, the maximum as a strength improvement, a military task performance test, they maintained endurance performance, and they also maintained body mass, and the control group also observed positive changes during the deployment period. The author observed large variation in training responses, suggesting different fitness level at baseline, and addresses the need for individual programs. So in summary, training in average 3 times per week of combined strength and endurance training during deployment, soldiers managed to maintain endurance, strength parameters, and improve military task performance. So training systematic during low conflict levels seems to maintain physical fitness in soldiers. Another training strategy which can be implemented during deployment is a task-specific training, aligning with the idea of train as you will fight. Throughout time, load carriage has shown to be an essential occupational task for soldiers during military operations, meaning there is a need to specific train for this loading task, which can be done by performing similar repetitive loading movements in the training programs, thus facilitating the neuromuscular system to adapt and then perform better in that particular task. This can eventually lead to better sustained force output, as the task would be relatively easy to perform with the soldier's better skill performance. Repeated mover training can also reduce risk of injury, and consequently, the soldier would be better prepared to handle a battlefield military task and requirements. This specificity of training on improving occupational tasks was investigated in a military population by Uyanen. Uyanen included 42 soldiers in a 12-week training study. It was conducted in a military environment, but not deployed. They were allocated to either a task-specific training group, which trained with full combat gear, performing sprints, crawling, costly drag with high intensity of effort. The strength group performed traditional resistance training program, and they had a control group performing regular military training as circuit training. The tests were in several strength and power measures, and they had a task-specific test where it started with a sprint before they crawled, then they carried a kettlebell, and then they had a costly drag before finishing up with a sprint in the end. The task-specific training group and traditional strength training group improved more in the simulated military task course compared to the control group after the first 6 weeks. The time went down in these two groups. But they also observed that the task-specific training group displayed greater improvements in most of the course compared to the strength group, thus highlighting the specificity of the task-specific training program. They also maintained physical fitness and task course despite a high amount of field training and decreased number of training sessions the last 6 weeks. So this study illustrates when only few training options are available, for example during deployment, the task-specific training are a good alternative to regular resistance training to promote and maintain physical fitness level for the deployed soldier. Furthermore, during this low-intensity area of the continuum, a minimal dose could also be a useful strategy to sustain fitness over time. There is known from athletic studies that one session with moderate to hard intensity per week can maintain strength and endurance capacities with residual effects up to 3 weeks or more. So with a tight schedule during the week, one session may be enough for several weeks to maintain soldiers' physical fitness. So training strategies implementing overload, periodization, and task-specific training seems to be strategies that can maintain physical fitness for the soldier during deployment, at least when the conflict intensity is low and the stress factors are at its lowest intensities. But how do we implement training strategies when we move along this conflict continuum with more frequent high-intensity operation during deployment, which demands quick response times and reduced possibility for systematic training over time? Currently, there is no established military standards for physical training during deployment in this side of the conflict continuum. However, we know that the demand for physical fitness must be high irrespective of the conflict level to sustain military readiness. It needs to be as high as possible all the time. But we also know that the determinants for military readiness, these stress factors, would increase concurrently with the intensity of the continuum. And this continuously challenges the soldier to maintain the demand for high physical fitness. And repeated operation in series would probably reinforce this decline in physical fitness, and hence reduce soldiers' military readiness. To get an understanding of what exactly happens with soldiers' physical fitness during high-intensity operations, we can look into these military field studies to get an idea what happens with body composition and physical performance in response to these exercises. As we remember, these field exercises are exposing the soldiers in combination of stressors during non-deployment periods to prepare and train the soldier for similar situation in the real battlefield. So I plotted data from field studies to get an impression of what happens in body composition and performance, with authors on the y-axis and percent change from pre-exercise to after the exercise on the x-axis. As we can see, there is a substantial changes in body composition and physical performance following these field exercises. There's up to 10% change in body mass, up to 40% decrease in fat mass, and between 1 to 3% change in muscle mass. In performance parameters, there is a reduction in 5 to 30% decrease in muscle performance. And these changes occurs after only a few days exposed to this stressful environment. So what can we learn from these field studies simulating extreme operation during deployment? There is likely to be a drop in physical fitness and muscle performance during these extreme conditions. It is often related to multiple stressors in combination for periods, and it may be difficult to avoid. Well, as we know, the soldier may not be in a physiological optimal state to train systematically every week because of the increased intensity and complexity with the conflict level. The soldier needs more flexibility in their training plan in such periods. So by having more flexible sessions performed in between these operations, which can be performed on a day-to-day basis, depending on circumstances and how the soldier's physiological state is an interesting method. This could be a more optimal training strategy for soldiers, where in session can be performed between these demanding operations wherein a training window is possible. This is likely the closest the soldier can come to an anabolic window, where the stress factor is minimized during times where there is more frequent operations occurring, and thus gives the soldier an opportunity to maintain this physical fitness level. So an example of a possible model for this flexibility, I drew up this model. And over a given mesocycle, for example, 6 weeks, the soldier together with his commander have set a specific training goal which the soldier should try to maintain or even improve if possible. Then the soldier have 3 alternative sessions to switch between: a hard, and a moderate, and an easy session, which varies in volume and intensity. Then the individual choose which session to conduct on a day-to-day basis, taking into account their physiological state and which stressors they have operated in the last days. For example, on a hard and long day in the field with long marches, they choose the easy sessions with focus on upper body strength, for instance. While another day, feeling more recovered, a hard session program can be performed, for example, 2 days in a row in this window of opportunity. In conjunction to this limited time window between operations, short micro-training cycle method could be a pertinent strategy to induce some training stimuli to maintain physical fitness. The micro-training training cycle method consists of very short training sessions. And Killian et al. Investigated this method in a military environment, wherein short, frequent sessions of endurance and strength training was compared to longer, less frequent sessions. He included 29 persons performed 8 weeks training in a military environment. The training consists of 9 times 15-minute sessions per week, the micro training, and the group 2 performed 3 times 45-minute sessions per week, this classic training program. And the weekly training volume was the same between the groups. The exercises were heavy resistance training, high intensity endurance training, and the muscle endurance training. After 8 weeks, the author observed similar increases between training groups in aerobic performance and in strength performance. So this can be a valuable strategy with short, frequent sessions which can be implemented in short breaks during the day or between operations, for example. Taken together, the soldier would likely have some benefit of this training strategy, as some training is likely better than nothing in these periods. However, in regard to this training window between operations, we know from these field exercise studies that the body needs several days to recover. Often it takes 1 to 2 weeks before the body is fully recovered and returned to pre-operation body mass and muscular performance levels. So I would recommend there is some time restrictions that need to be followed to reduce risk of injury or delay the recovery process unnecessary. And perhaps more importantly, delay soldiers' active duty readiness. So advantage of using this flexible training model is that the commander knows that the soldier is doing training to maintain physical fitness over a certain time period. And it's easier to control recovery and mitigate overtraining. And this advantage is that the commander does not actually know whether the training is done, and there is a risk that the soldier frequently chooses the easy session, for example, due to low motivation. So to increase motivation, maybe include frequent testing of physical fitness during deployment. Then the soldier can have some extra motivation to continue his training progressions. A last strategy which could prepare the soldier for the physical demand and maybe better preserve military readiness during deployment can be to ensure that the soldier have as high physical fitness level as possible before entering the deployment period. Then the soldier may have a higher physical capacity than the demand when entering this deployment period. So we have a reserve capacity which is greater than the demand during this conflict continuum. An initial higher baseline have more relative strength and endurance capacity to use, and the soldier may thus maintain physical demand longer by having a reserve physical capacity when entering this deployment period, as illustrated here in Soldier 1 and 2, where in Soldier 1 better preserve military readiness and physical fitness at a given time. So sufficient training ahead of deployment is of importance and cannot be overlooked in this regard, and thus is a strategy to mitigate loss of military readiness. So to summary up strategies, included frequent training sessions seems to maintain physical fitness and perceived health during deployment, during these low intensity conflict periods. Including task-specific training could also maintain soldiers' physical fitness during these periods. Maintain physical fitness with 1 weekly session could be possibly in periods. During high-intensity conflict periods, more strategies is needed to sustain physical fitness due to reduced possibility to train systematic in periods. Flexible periodization can be an alternative to better sustain training continuity, and short micro-sessions of high intensity, low volume can be an effective and time-efficient strategy in these high-intensity periods. And high as possible physical fitness level pre-deployment can maintain soldiers' physical resilience. So to end this presentation, I come up with a few summary practical applications. Create a mesocycle with specific training goals for the individual soldiers over a given time. Make maybe 3 to 4 alternative sessions, easy to hard, which can be chosen by the soldier depending on his or her physiological readiness. Start short micro session is probably better than no training sessions. And we should also remember a short recovery period following demanding operation is necessary to minimize delayed recovery and military readiness. And initial fitness level must be optimized as good as possible before entering a deployment period. Thank you.
Thank you, Sjur. And we now open up for a few questions from the examination committee. We have a microphone on its way down. So go ahead when you're ready. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your clear and informative presentation. I liked very much. My first question, how do you know physical and mental loading of different military tasks? What are the maximum loading in different military tasks? Because I think it's important when making any strategies.
Maximal
loading, physical and mental loading.
Physical and mental loading in this
in different military tasks.
Yeah. And what is the? I'm not sure whether I.
How do you know? How do you know? What
If they are having a great effort in the task-specific training you're thinking about?
So when they are in their military operations and they are doing different type of military activities, according U.S. Army, there are over 2,000 different tasks.
Yeah. Okay.
So how do you know how much they require aerobic or strength capabilities?
Well, then I need to know all these occupational tasks, what they require. So that's maybe not so easy to know. Then you need to test all these military tasks. So yeah, I do not know if they are maximizing their effort in this training strategy, also in this task-specific training. No. No, that's difficult when they are working in so many different areas and tasks they experience during these deployment periods. But no, I'm not sure how you can measure that.
There are some studies, but only a few of tasks have been studied. So really more research is needed in this regard. But of course, there are some experiences soldiers who have worked a long period in a certain task. He knows what this task really requires.
Yeah, so I understand this load and carriage task is very frequent use, carrying thing, of course. So, but of course there are, and they always have measuring this load and carriage in all these studies I have read now. So, but of course there are other tasks that needs to be investigated as well.
Okay, thank you. And my other question is, you mentioned some strategies, and in the beginning of your lecture you told about recovery. Can you tell some recovery methods which can enhance recovery during short recovery period they may have during the operation?
Yeah, so following their operations by securing, by ensuring that they have sufficient with nutrition and is one thing, and they should also, if possible, so all these domains, ensure sleep recovery, nutrition is two main topics, I think.
I agree, they are the most, the best ones.
Yeah.
And they have also been confirmed that they are the best ones, but do you know any other recovery methods? I know that you are working into physiotherapy.
And massage? No, that's not a good idea. That's more a mental thing, I think, from my perspective. Now they have also, in athletes, investigated all these hot and cold baths and for recovery after demanding sports, for demanding activities. But they have may also slow the recovery process by inhibiting this signaling pathway. So I don't know if that's the best way. So nutrition and sleeping is probably the best, but that's not always possible if they have operation in series. But then they maybe needs to have enough people so they can switch between who is going out on operations, if that's possible.
Okay, thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Sjur. Very nice talk. I'll minimize my questions to one, because I was also interested in the recovery period, so that's covered. the flexible training model that you introduced here, and you said that one possible risk or disadvantage is that the soldier always chooses the easy training program or module. Couldn't it be the other way around then also, that the soldier maybe overestimates capacity and readiness and chooses a too hard training model? And could we monitor biology somehow to kind of, you know, not only rely on a perceived feeling of readiness?
Yeah, this perceived feeling is very subjective between individuals and how they feel recovered, of course. Now then we need to have these biological markers, I guess, the blood samples with looking into these hormonal levels, if they are balanced again between testosterone and cortisol, and see if they are back to within the normal range. So that could be a strategy.
And any wearables that you can think of? Wearables?
Variables? Yeah.
Wearables.
Yeah.
Not well. That's also a variable, maybe. But I was thinking, so to kind of get an objective measure of sleep quality, heart rate.
Yeah, heart rate monitoring, maybe.
Has that been done? Or, I mean, in all these studies that you elegantly summed up, do we know anything about physiology and biology in these subjects, or is it just I feel ready or I feel tired?
For the mostly in my consensus is that they have monitoring some of these hormonal levels during deployment, which they can see after more prolonged, after some periods in the deployment period, they see that the testosterone level is sort of declining a little bit, if I remember correctly, and also this stress hormone is the other way. So they are getting reduced readiness, and because due to this and fatigue in the end of the deployment periods, which mean they are not maximized, ready for high intensity operations. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. This was crystal clear, I must say, and very interesting. So well done. I have a question. I have to put on my glasses because you talked a lot about, you know, the physiological changes and adaptations and what is happening, and I'm into the more psychological, mental health factors. So you ended up by giving some practical implementation and recommendations, and we want to keep our soldiers, their motivation high. So do any of the studies you have talked about today measured or have some in-depth interviews about what do the soldiers prefer regarding training?
No, I haven't. Yeah, also there is a problem with this motivation during deployment periods to keep continuity in training. That's one big problem I can see from some of the studies I read. So how do we promote motivation in these soldiers?
Well, we have to ask them first.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So work to be done here.
Yeah, I see. But if you to ensure motivation for training, you have to probably need to have some external factors, like repeated testing during the deployment periods, maybe, so they can see that they even maintain or maybe manage to increase the physiological fitness. That's whether it is possible. I don't.
Yeah, and also, you know, whether there are kind of preferring these training sessions, or whether they want to do the more classical type of program for training. So this is really interesting, in my opinion, at least.
Yeah, and I see there have been speculated that they actually need to be more obligated to do training. So a little autonomy have to be reduced.
So how is that affecting the motivation?
Maybe negatively, yeah.
Thank you so much.
By that, I thank the candidate for his lecture, and I invite everyone back to the auditorium at 1 p.m. And provided that the examination committee finds the trial lecture acceptable, the candidate will then defend his thesis, which is with the title Exploring the Influence of Resistance Training Volume, Intensity, and Diet on Skeletal Muscle Adaptations.